you. I want to welcome each of you to Real Inclusion Includes Black Men, where we're going to be talking about Black men in corporate America, perspectives on thriving. Super excited about the conversation this evening. When we did our pre-call last week with our two guest presenters, and I will certainly introduce the both of them to you, it was great because it was a very spirited conversation. There was a lot of good insight, a lot of healthy discussion around perspectives. And so to give you a bit of insight into this particular series, this is part 3 of what has been a really interesting discussion around Black men in various scenarios. Our first series was around the mental well-being of Black men in corporate America, and just in general. The second series was around the criminal justice system and the impact of the system as it relates to Black men. And now we're here to talk about corporate America and all things related to the workplace, perspectives on thriving, how to advance, how to excel, etc. And so a bit about me, I'm the founder and CEO of Trim Your Enterprises, and my firm is a firm that specializes in working with women and diverse talent, as well as organizations, and helping them lead talent more inclusively. Prior to my time in terms of my own firm, I spent 20 plus years in corporate America. So this topic is near and dear to me as it relates to everything related to being successful in the workplace, whether you are at the early stage of your career or if you are in the later half of your career. So very grateful that we have two experts who are joining us this evening. I will do formal introductions by way of their bios, but then we'll get into the conversation. I believe in the power of storytelling, so they're going to talk a little bit about their career journey. We are going to be using the chat feature. You will notice that everyone is currently muted, as well as the videos are off, just to minimize any type of background noise and distractions. So if you all can just make sure that make sure that everyone remains muted, and we will open up the lines during the last 10-15 minutes where there will be an open time for questions. Certainly, again, leverage the chat feature with your questions, comments. The host and I will be managing the comment section, so we will pipe in as needed. We will ask questions, or if there's some information that needs to be expounded upon, we will certainly make sure that that happens. So let me start by introducing our distinguished guests. I'll start with D.L. Morris. D.L. is currently a partner at Hinshaw Culbertson, which is a law firm here in Chicago. He's enjoyed a 12-year career at the firm. I want to say he made partner about 7 years ago, and his career track is pretty interesting because this was the firm that he worked in as a summer associate while in law school at DePaul. Some interesting things about DL: he's a 2016 fellow for Leadership Greater Chicago. DL is from the west side of Chicago. He's active in his community. He currently serves on the board for the Joffrey Ballet. And in terms of his educational background, he's a graduate of Wheaton College with his undergraduate degree, as well as DePaul University for his law degree. So DL, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Next, I'm going to introduce Andre Rice. Andre is the president of Muller Monroe Asset Management firm, which is a private equity firm based here in Chicago. Andre founded the firm in 1999. Prior to becoming an entrepreneur, he spent time at large organizations such as Kraft, as well as what is now KPMG and Goldman Sachs. Interestingly enough, with respect to Andre, his firm now manages over $1 billion of assets. So in terms of just the fact that he's been able to grow his firm over the number of years and to reach that milestone is pretty significant. In addition to his role as president of his own firm, he also sits on the board for CNA Financial Corporation, which is a publicly traded insurance company here in Chicago. So very excited to hear Andre's insights from the standpoint of being an entrepreneur, as well as someone who has been successful in terms of securing a seat on a publicly traded board, because we know, based upon statistics, that doesn't happen every day. So Andre, thank you for joining us, and welcome. We're going to begin the conversation, again, the power of storytelling. Interested in hearing from you all as relates to your career journey. So DL, I will start with you in terms of just sharing with us your career journey, key milestones along the way, etc. You're unmuted. I'm unmuting you now. There you go.
No, thank you, Joyce. It's certainly an honor to be here and also to be able to partner with Andre in this amazing conversation. Just making sure everyone can hear me, right? You can hear me well? Good. This virtual reality that we're all trying to get used to is fun as we all acclimate to the new normal. But just briefly, you really hit it in the introductory remarks on the career arc and coming up from Chicago. And I think I've always been interested in, going beyond the traditional norms when it comes to opportunities that I could pursue. And I think that was part of the journey, going from West Side Chicago all the way up to the North Side Chicago for high school, as well as really where I'm navigating in my career. I was very intentional about the practice that I wanted to go into. I didn't want to just kind of follow a more traditional route, if you will, that a lot of African Americans tend to take in their practice. And so I had a focus on commercial litigation, particularly with financial workout litigation, as it relates to representing a lot of lenders and loan workout scenarios. And part of that is just being a child of the times, coming out in 2008 when we were just starting to head into a significant recession. But also just, I think the lesson to be learning that we're going to talk about is, what do you do when you're given an opportunity to be in the room and to certainly make the most out of those opportunities. So excited to certainly have the conversation and continue to engage tonight.
Excellent. Thank you. So Andre, tell us a bit about your career journey and where you're at today.
Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Good. Well, the journey starts in a small town in South Carolina, population 2,000, so really far from the West Side. When I first came to Chicago, people told me, whatever you do, don't go to the West Side. So I came to Chicago after college to go to graduate school at the University of Chicago. I went to South Carolina State undergraduate. And from there, my life sort of evolved in ways that I could never have imagined. First, to work at Pete Marwick, as it was then called, then the M&A group at Kraft Foods. And between those two, the longest stint in a big company was with Goldman Sachs on the security sales side. And then I decided I wanted to be on my own and went off to buy small companies for myself. So it's been an interesting journey. It's been a fascinating journey. And especially, I'm old enough to remember a swimming pool in my hometown that was for whites only, as well as a laundromat in my hometown. We had a colored laundromat, believe it or not. And so I've seen a lot in the last many years. A lot has changed in the last many years.
No, and thank you for that. And I think you raised a very interesting point in terms of the fact that the both of you are coming from different upbringings in terms of geographically. We're talking about different industry segments that you've been successful in, but we're also talking about the difference in age. So in terms of just the generational perspectives of how, Andre, perhaps you've pursued your career versus D.L., how you've pursued your career. So I think this is important to highlight, because when we talk about thriving in our respective careers, it's an art, not a science. So there's never one way to go about it. So really the objective for this evening is to really get into insights that folks can take bits and pieces of your journeys and perhaps apply to their professional lives as well. So we're going to move to, and I appreciate everyone who submitted in advance questions and topics that you all were interested in. And one of the things that came up repeatedly was around the topic of authenticity. And so, we know about, we hear all the time, showing up as your authentic self in the workplace, being able to be that person that, I don't want to say assimilate, but that can work in different environments. And because we know that every organization has a company culture, has unspoken rules. And so when you think about the corporate culture in which you've been successful and what's acceptable, what's considered not acceptable by way of style and culture, maybe even communication styles by way of tone, and things of that nature. I'm interested in terms of your perspective on how do you respectfully maneuver, navigate, challenge appropriately when what's expected in terms of the cultural norms within an organization may challenge the authenticity of who you are as an individual. And I'll start with you, Andre, because I know we've had a lot of discussion around the corporate game, as we like to call it. So what's your perspective on balancing authenticity, but while maintaining and being able to work in various company cultures?
Let me level set first, because sometimes when I talk about race, people hear things that I don't say. One, racism exists. Two, as long as humans are humans, it will exist. Three, you must and can win in spite of racism, And 4, sometimes your perception can be wrong. And so that's a level set. And we start talking about inclusion. The whole idea of your authentic self is a little bit foreign to me. Wherever I am who I am. And I think it starts with knowing who you are and being grounded. If you walk into a place and you're not grounded, don't know who you are, you're likely to easily be knocked off kilter. And no one's asking you to be a phony where you work. However, there's a game. There's a friend of mine who's on this call maybe. My best friend said, there's always a game when you walk in the door. You have to decide, are you going to play the game? How are you going to play the game? Or you're not going to play the game? But the game is going on, and everyone's playing the game. The white boys are playing the game. Everyone's playing the game. And so if you walk into a big company, or any size company, you have to understand that there's a game going on. That's the key thing.
And I guess if I can dive a little bit deeper in terms of how do you, it's easy to play the game when you know the rules. I think most people can play the game if you know the rules, but when the rules are a bit unspoken, how do you navigate that? And maybe this is a little bit about advocacy and support. So I'm interested in either of your perspectives on knowing the rules to the game so that you can actually play it effectively.
Should I go first, D.L.?
Yeah, please.
I think when you enter any organization, you walk in the door and you establish a reputation and image pretty quickly. And a lot of it centers around small things. How do you say hello? How do you greet people? And people want to work with people who are nice, competent, honest, reliable, the whole bit. And in every organization, if you pay attention, you will find someone whom you can connect with. And there are mentors and there are sponsors. Sponsors tend to be more senior, a lot more senior. Mentors can be a peer who's been there, who knows the game. A mentor can be someone also older, can be a boss. And I think finding that mentor, actively sort of searching out that mentor and asking someone, I'm new here, I'd love to be able to come to you with questions. I think most people will say, sure, well, come talk to me. And with that initial foray, that initial handout, you start to establish a relationship. And hopefully you find someone there who will tell you the truth, who will tell you when you've done something that's been politically incorrect. I think often, and I didn't really know this at first, I didn't know I was supposed to reach out to people and get to know them. I was always friendly and always nice. My grandmother always stressed you had to have good manners. And that, was her shorthand way to say you want to be nice. The other thing about assimilating and losing your soul, I see work as just one component of your life, whether you work for yourself or whether you work for someone else. And I see them as sort of 4 interlocking rings. There's work, there's family, there's friend, and their community. The community could include church. And the center of that, where they all come together in sort of this Venn diagram, is the things that keep you healthy, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And you can't depend on your job to do that. That's why you have community. That's why you have family. That's why you have friends. And so you have to be realistic to some degree as to what you're going to get from work.
Yeah, what's your perspective?
I would just add to that. I do think a lot of it is driven by relationship, and I think there's kind of 2 components of it. When you first walk into a new environment, you're still getting an assessment on where everyone is, their personalities, the rules of the game that are spoken, and the rules that are certainly not spoken. But I think you also come into any place with your own brand to sell. I mean, you can only, I say this to a lot of our younger talent, you can only sell your brand, and the people that love you are going to buy into that brand and are going to, support, invest in that brand. And sometimes that's not necessarily going to work for everyone. And so understanding how you navigate internally with the folks that have bought into that brand, if you will, is really important. And I think that comes down to, again, focusing on relationships and identifying the relationships internally that are going to really help you advance, and certainly staying away from, if you will, mitigating the relationships that are not going to be as helpful. But I think even at the core, there's more that unites us and that folks can find in common than divides us when you really try and peel back all the different layers of humanity that we share.
No, that's a good response. And so in terms of, we've talked a little bit about advocacy, we've talked a bit about relationships. And so when you think about reconciling, particularly in the time that we're dealing in now, in terms of everything that society is managing with the pandemic, with civil unrest, with systemic racism is now becoming much more of a pointed topic within our workplaces. As executives within your firm, I think there is, sometimes it could be what some could call tension in terms of how do I advocate for change? How do I really push the envelope in a way that will get the organization to move in a different direction? But while also, and I love what someone said by way of saving face. So in terms of understanding the balance, because at the end of the day, there could be unintended consequences as results to someone advocating or someone pushing or someone really challenging the status quo. So I'll start with you, D.L., in terms of what does that look like in terms of, let's say, saving face versus working to save for the future in terms of future policies and culture changes at an organization?
Yeah, that's a very provocative question. I'm sure a lot of folks have different perspectives on it. And I think it goes back to your point about authenticity and, you know, knowing yourself and then identifying what legacy you want to leave. And I think for me personally, I just kind of have an approach where I just want, at the end of the day, people to say he loved well and he gave it his all. And so when that comes to utilizing your individual and your professional platforms to really try and advocate for the advancements that you care about, and more specifically when it comes to diversity and inclusion issues, and even more specifically when you're talking about recent events with respect to George Floyd and the responses and a corporate response out of that, I think leading authentically involves setting the tone from the top, exemplifying the culture that you want to see replicated in your organization. Mm-hmm. And so as a leader in the firm, that came down to, you know, really identifying from a reflective standpoint, how was I feeling and showing up and sharing that, being transparent to be able to share that with members of the firm, certainly those that are closer in friendships. But that, you know, for me, I write different poetic kind of free thought pieces that I've been happy to be able to share with the firm. The first one was about Ahmaud Arbery, about 2.5 weeks prior to the George Floyd incident. So there was already a little bit of internal priming, if you will, around our culture to be more attentive to these issues of racism that we've seen, so that there was an immediate reaction when the George Floyd situation happened, where folks were really shocked, alarmed, and this awakening that I think we're continuing to try and process through. But, you know, the progress that we've made internally when it comes to doing more than just issuing these statements to say that we, you know, do not condone racism, but to actually put an infrastructure around redressing the systemic racism that tends to plague our communities most adversely, has come from the one-on-one conversations with folks at every level of management, just as much as the joint sessions from our diversity committee and our management committee to talk about the reality of where we are as a legal industry in particular, and the goals of where we want to be. And I think it's through the time that I've spent certainly cultivating relationships at the firm, certainly doing good work. I think Andre would attest that they're not going to give you any sort of a platform if you're not first and foremost demonstrating your skills as a practitioner. But doing good work gets you a seat at the table, and then being courageous, if you will, to use that seat to effectuate the things that you believe in. Absolutely.
Andre, what's your perspective?
Yeah, it's funny to pick up on what D.L. said, the seat at the table. When you go to hire someone, as we do, you're looking for someone who's honest and forthright, start. Then someone who I mentioned earlier, someone nice. Can you see yourself Zooming with this person now for hours on end, or living with this person in the office every day? And then you're looking for someone who's hardworking, reliable, and someone who's good at what they do. If D.L. cannot answer questions about the legality, the legal issues that come to him, then it doesn't matter how nice he is. But those 4 things are just the price of entry. Mm-hmm. You have to have those before you can start to talk about anything else. Because if you don't have those things and you lose your job, it wasn't about race. Mm-hmm. It's about something else.
Mm-hmm.
And then the key thing, again, to echo what D.L. said, it comes down to relationships. Your ability to establish a relationship with someone, hopefully someone who can be helpful. And sometimes it can be a peer, a peer who's more experienced at the corporate game than you are, maybe by the way they grew up. I mean, like a lot of us on this call, maybe I was the first in my family to go to college, actually the first to finish 10, 12 full years of high school. So I didn't have anyone in my immediate family to tell me about the game. But luckily along the way, because of personality and reaching out to people, one guy adopted me, another guy adopted me. And again, the perception sometimes can be all wrong. I thought one particular guy did not like me at all. And then through some circuitous route that I won't admit here, we all got a chance to look at our interview files. And the guy who I thought liked me thought, hire him if you want, nothing special. And the guy who was hammering me the hardest was the guy who had written on my form, hired this kid today. Mm. And so perception, that made me think about it. Just because you think someone's an ally doesn't mean. And then at some point later, maybe in this conversation we'll get to, when the person who looks like you is not an advocate, or is afraid to be an advocate, or maybe don't want you there because you're in their way, because they're seeing the pie as being, smaller than it is, and that can be very disarming.
Yeah, I don't think we need to wait and pause for that part of the conversation. I'm interested because I've experienced it, I've seen it, I've experienced it. So tell us a bit more about your experience there and how do you navigate it? Because for me, it was disappointing.
Right. Well, interestingly enough, I've thought long and hard about this call and tried to think of specific instances of overt racism. And I had a hard time thinking about that, coming up with something of my long career. And in my early career at Goldman, the worst sales call I ever had was with a local Black executive here in Chicago, who's long dead, so I won't mention his name, but he ran a bank. And I was treated unbelievably poorly. And I had several of those incidents where I reached out to very fluent African Americans trying to network. And I'm telling you, it was very disappointing. And I decided, that's not the way it's going to happen. And then I've been in situations where there have been issues of diversity where the person who was least supportive, even a current instance now, happens to be a Black woman in a particular place. And that is because I think her currency is a part of being Black. And so to bring others in, or too many others in, I think she feels, wrongfully, that maybe it dilutes her power. And that's always, the old crab in a barrel. And that's very alarming when you see that.
Yeah.
I would only jump in and add on that. When I first started at the firm, there was an older gentleman who was a partner, and I probably could never get the time of day for him to even acknowledge me walking in the halls. And I think part of it is recognizing that there's a lot of war stories that folks have experienced throughout the course of their own career. And I just say that to say, by the end of his career, when he was retiring, he and I had grown very close. And I think that was from me being able to, survive, if you will, those first few years at the firm and show that I wasn't just going to be a flash in the pan, but that the resilience was going to pay off. And then I think, he definitely took me more under the wing and started talking to me about some of those more explicit rules of the game that he'd start to appreciate later in his career. So I think it just goes back to the relationships that you learn how to navigate and figuring out which people can offer you what. You're not going to get the same from everyone, and you're not going to get the same from one consistent person throughout the arc of your career or time in an organization. But what can you pick up this piece from this person and another piece from another person to help you continue to move forward?
Yeah, I think those are two great responses. And what's come up several times in both of your responses is the importance of relationships and having a variety of different relationships throughout the organization, different positions, folks that are different from you, from whatever the dimension of diversity might be. So for some of the folks that are on the call that may be a little bit more earlier in their career and a little bit less familiar with how do you forge a relationship with someone who perhaps is in a completely different area where there's no direct tie to business per se with you in terms of, you know, a supervisor or someone within your business area. What's some advice that you can offer in terms of being able to identify a potential advocate and sponsor? And how do you begin to, let's say, court that relationship, start the relationship? What advice could either of you offer for someone in that position?
I'll start. It's very simple. Just say hello. That's the first thing. Say hello. You know, I'm Andre Rice. I've just joined XYZ Corporation. You know, can we have lunch? Can we have coffee? And, you know, most people will say yes. Most people, even if they don't want to do it, will be too embarrassed to say no. So then you go out to lunch or coffee and you just chat a little bit. Not necessarily, you know, how long have you been here? Get to know them. Have you enjoyed it here? I mean, can be just that simple, saying hello. And then over time, as you start to work, some people will be very nice to you. Some will not be nice to you. You can't necessarily figure out why the people who are not nice to you are not nice to you. And it's not so important at first. But the ones who are nice to you, try to deepen those relationships. And in the case, if you're in a firm where you obviously will have a boss, I would be very upfront. This is my first, if it's my first job, this is my first professional job. I'm very eager to do a great job. I'd love to be able to come to you for advice. And also, if you see me doing something that you think is bad for my career, please tell me early. So if you invite the criticism.
Yeah.
You know, I had a white guy walk up to me when I was at Goldman. I used to have a patch of hair here. And, you know, a lot of brothers have that. And one thing you notice when you walk into these big corporations is none of the white boys have mustaches. I mean, you know, now you see a few, but no one had a mustache. And this white guy said to me, he said, what's that? I said, well, it's just hair. He said, look, you stand out enough being a black guy, shave it. So, you know, I wasn't offended by that. I haven't thought about it. I cut it off. It's never grown back. And luckily he had the courage to tell me something that no one else was going to tell me. So I was always very open to any kind of feedback without having my feelings, without being easily offended. Mm-hmm. I think when people sense that you're open, they will tell you things. And again, you don't have to always take the advice, but it's better to have someone tell you that. But it starts with the hello, that building a relationship as simple as extending your hand to someone, mm-hmm. inviting them. You know, now Zoom is going to be a whole different world. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but in the real world, which hopefully we'll be back to, as simple as that.
Yeah, I guess I would just say it's an interesting nuance depending on your personality set. If you're more introverted, I think that becomes a different conversation around what can you still do to be intentional about trying to build relationships. And I do think to even put it in a racial lens, unfortunately, I think Black people tend to have more of the burden of initiating those conversations, if you will, helping your majority peers feel more at ease with who you are and your presence in the room. And people take a lot of different approaches to how they do that. But I think if you are able to and are, you know, the personality minded enough to be able to initiate those conversations, there's nothing that can't be solved over a cup of coffee or a glass of bourbon, in my opinion. So, you know, one of those initial invitations to say, you know, I want to get to know you. Can we go run on a coffee break? Or can we do a virtual coffee session and schedule a time to, you know, get on a Zoom together and just introduce myself and tell you a little bit more about where I'm trying to go. And I think more often than not, you'll get better just in the entire way that networking is a skill that you exercise. You'll get better at identifying the people who are genuine and actually interested in supporting you. Versus the people that are really just giving you lip service. And to those people, there's still a role I think you play to ultimately win them over through your goods, your services, your skill set. But I think that's one of the, you know, steps to building relationship and just being intentional.
Yeah, and I would agree with the both of you. I found that people enjoy talking about themselves and, you know, what they do and some of their accomplishments. And so in terms of your advice around just extending the invitation to connect, I would say that I've done that and that actually does work. If we can pivot, then we're going to go to a couple of the questions in the chat feature, but I can't recall, one of you had mentioned in terms of, I think it was maybe you, D.L., had talked a bit about, or maybe it was Andre, who had mentioned about a lot of the statements that we've seen CEOs issue in light of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, et cetera. And while it's great that people are having a point of view, without action, without intentional action, it really does not matter. And so I'll start with you, Andre, particularly because when I think about the civil unrest even when you include like the pandemic, which is impacting the Black and brown communities at a higher rate, and the commitment of CEOs in the process in terms of looking at their organizations. As you sit on the board of a publicly traded company, I believe you may be the only African-American on the board. What is your role in terms of, as a board, not you in particular, but I do think that you perhaps have an added, I hate to say burden, but there's an added responsibility perhaps that is looked upon as being the only African-American on the board. What is the board's role and responsibility in keeping the CEO and holding the CEO accountable for taking a deeper look at things within their respective organizations that they could be doing to address systemic racism, the fact that there may not be, and this is not for any particular company, this is a general statement, there may not be as many people of color in leadership roles, et cetera. So what's the board's role in the accountability of the CEO to get some things done?
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned one thing about a burden. I was never allowed by my grandmother to let my race be a burden. Mm. She said, boy, you're going to be Black to the day you die. So you have to come up with another reason for failure. And so I don't see it as a burden, and nor do I see talking about diversity in a boardroom as a burden. I see it as my duty. Mm-hmm. And luckily I'm on a board where there are others, not just me, and a CEO who is committed to diversity. And I think diversity is just one of the elements a board should pay attention to. I sit on the audit committee. I'm an independent director, which means I don't work at the company. I sit on the audit committee. I sit on compensation committee. And so I'm not just a one issue person. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in things that are going to help move the needle. Because again, a business is in business to make profits. Because if you don't make profits, you can't do all these other things mm-hmm. that your other stakeholders, non-shareholders want you to do. You have to be profitable. So I see diversity as an issue, which is important. And I come at it from two angles. One, there's a moral imperative. And then it just makes good business sense. As the world changes, as people, in our case, the board I'm on, people who buy insurance, they are Black and brown often. People who are risk managers inside of a corporation, CFOs who are responsible for this, are Black and brown often. And it helps, I think, if you have a workforce. And the insurance industry is not particularly diverse, just in general. And so that's always a challenge. But I don't see it as a burden. I see it as a duty. And it's just one of the many things that we focus on. But the board is there to hold the CEO accountable on everything. Mm-hmm.
And D.L., I'm interested because you also, in addition to just being, but as a litigating partner, you also are the diversity and inclusion partner at your law firm. So what are some things that you all are doing to really drive the agenda around diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I am going to assume we predominantly have a Black audience on the line, and so I'm going to be very real. I'm going to keep it real, as they say.
Well, would you change if there were white people on the line, D.L.?
I think they would receive it differently, but probably not, because this
is
their
why. Problem, though, right?
This is why. It's an inside joke, if you will, that I think we talk about when it comes to diversity in the initiatives that I'm leading. And I asked my team, am I on the verge of 63 King or 68 King? And I say that because if you've actually watched more recently that documentary, King in the Wilderness, it talks about the last years of Dr. King's life and how many more people perhaps disagreed with him. His approval ratings were really low when he was advocating against Vietnam and certain other issues affecting the Black community. But when 63, and he's saying, I have a dream, and that's the speech that we all remember and we celebrate on his holiday, we've romanticized, if you will, the full spectrum of who King is. And I say that because I guess that's the paradigm that I operate in when it comes to our diversity initiatives, is that I'm not here to just be that romanticized 1963 King, but there's a role that I can play to give sugar as necessary but to also keep us accountable. And I consider myself and my role in the company as kind of the Thurgood Marshall of the NAACP on behalf of all the Black, brown, and other diverse folks in our firm. And so having the difficult conversations and being willing to have those conversations, and particularly around this scenario of George Floyd, it came down to what are we doing to be actively anti-racist, which is not a conversation I feel that we have often in diversity circles. We tend to feel more comfortable talking about implicit bias and the automatic functions that our brain does that makes us, the less well-intended people than we think we are. But when you talk about what are you doing to be actively anti-racist in a society that otherwise is racist systemically, is a difficult conversation. But I think when you embrace those conversations and you do it in a way that still allows grace on all sides, that I'm not going to have it completely perfect in my response, and nor do I assume you're going to have it perfect in the questions that you need to ask. I think it lends to a level of trust in a relationship that we keep coming back down to, that allows you to continue to take steps forward.
Mm-hmm. I think those are two really good responses in terms of things that have worked, and I guess the ownership that we all, and the role that we all have to play, because it doesn't just fall on, one person, one sector of folks, but it's something that has to happen throughout the organization. We're going to go to questions in a moment, so I will be unmuting the lines. It's probably easier for folks because some of the questions are a bit lengthy, so for folks to actually be able to pose their own questions, so we'll unmute in a moment. But one thing that I really want to get into is around career planning. When you take a look at, according to a 2020 S&P 500 board diversity report from Spencer Stewart, which is an executive search firm, they had reported that firms typically have done a better job of having more diverse directors on their board. But typically when it comes to Black directors, it's about 20%. And that number has been pretty consistent, so we really haven't seen an uptick. I'm interested, Andre, from your standpoint, in terms of the fact that board seats do not turn over often. So it's not as if this is something that happens yearly. How did you position yourself to be selected for a board seat at a publicly traded company? Because I do believe that's aspirational for folks.
Well, you're asking all the right questions. And the one word that you're going to hear from D.L. and from me, and D.L. and I are far apart in age. And what's interesting is that we may come at things differently, but then you'll hear some common themes. And the one common theme is relationship. I had developed a personal relationship with some of the key people involved at this company, and they were looking for another independent director in Chicago, and they wanted someone of color, and they knew me. And so I think for those who aspire to a board seat, getting experience on civic boards, charitable boards, a lot of it's the same. Civic boards and charitable boards, you're dealing with budgets, you're dealing with governance issues. You don't often have the SEC out there, but you do have the IRS and other agencies, and learning how to interact with the CEO, I think it can be very useful. And those are considered very relevant training grounds for people who've not served on boards. But it's relationship. You can build those, a lot of people you can pick charities that you care about, things that you really care about at the same time, could be ways to meet people from different walks of life. And that's one of the things I think everyone should think about. And getting on civic boards, again, is letting it be known to people in city government or state government that you're looking to serve in those capacities, and getting selected for that. Networking to do that through the people you know. And then you position yourself. I've not had much of a hugely public profile. I'm a bit private. I'm not shy, but I'm a bit private. And but getting known. And now with social media and everything else, which scares me more than it scares Joyce, you can actually become better known more quickly, for good or bad. For relationships, that's the key.
Absolutely.
I would only add that it's certainly the network that you build. And I think you find a place to start. So if you got folks that are a little bit more junior, and not that I'm on a publicly traded board yet, I'll say yet.
Yeah.
But I didn't just turn over and, first year associate jump on the Joffrey board, which is a cultural arts organization here in Chicago. It started with getting involved in a lot of other civic boards that I cared about that address, family homelessness or, community engagement. And those relationships, certainly leveled into other relationships, and people start to hear about you, to Andre's point. And I think I just have to underscore is getting involved in things that are of interest to you, because if you're just getting on something to try and build your resume, people are going to identify that immediately. And that lack of authenticity is really going to do you a disservice. But when they see that you're engaged, you're interested about the issues, you're actually being a good board member and showing up to meetings and doing the work, that sort of experience that you get as well leverages into the other opportunities that come to you.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree. So right now we're going to unmute the lines because, again, there were several questions that populated, but they were pretty in terms of the length of what was written. And so I will start with, I believe, Kenneth Smith, you had a question. Would you like to go? You're unmuted. Okay, Kenneth may no longer have a question. What about Bendita? There was a question that you had posed. If you have the floor, and you can certainly ask now.
Unmute her.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it did. I unmuted everyone. Unmute all.
There we go.
Hi, thanks for hosting this discussion. The two gentlemen speaking have been quite enlightening. My question was about, there's some research that demonstrates that more senior diverse professionals that mentor more junior diverse professionals have to pay a tax. So they experience retribution from their colleagues, their white colleagues, for basically for mentoring, sponsoring, providing investments towards more junior diverse professionals. How much of that do you think plays a role in whether or not more senior diverse professionals choose to invest? Or do you think that there are other reasons that are more salient?
Who wants to take that one?
I'll let D.L. go first on that one.
Thank you for that question, Bendita. I don't know that it's an either or. I think it absolutely plays a factor. Even myself as a 12th year partner, when you get younger Black talent at the firm, you want to be able to expend energy for everybody and give everybody the same amount of support, but identifying the people who need it more and the folks that are going to actually utilize it to make good on the investment of your time, your energy, your mental space is something also that you have to measure. But I think there absolutely is a tax. I mean, I think we hear it in the outside counsel arena with in-house counsel in terms of if you're the only Black GC, do you pay a cost to hire that Black outside counsel? If they screw up a case or they make a mistake, then you get looked at. And so I think it's the trust factors that you build with folks is important. Whether you are a senior person and junior person, when you're junior, making sure you're going out of your way, right, to show that you're serious, to show that you're not just here to collect a paycheck and go home, but you're here to establish and build a career. I think that speaks to a lot of the older professionals that are going to resonate and relate to that journey, and then get those folks to buy into your story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, I can't refute this study if it's an empirically researched study about this, but in my career, I only had 3 jobs prior to becoming an entrepreneur. I was always able to find a more senior African-American wherever I was to guide me, whether it was at, there weren't many, so as you can imagine, there's only a few of us, more now maybe then. But yeah, I think those who are afraid to do it are just, I think, cowards. I just can't imagine that if I'm in a big company and there's a young African-American person that I wouldn't take time to. My best friend who's listening in did that at a major pharmaceutical company and was very actively engaged in the Black employee group and went out of his way to recruit African-Americans and recruited ones who could succeed. So when anyone would say, well, I can't find blacks who can do this, he would say, look, I got a bunch in my group and they're all hitting quotas, which in the pharmaceutical world is the key metric. So I think those I don't have a lot of patience for cowards. Life is too short.
Super. Rochelle Foster, I see that you have a question. You have the floor, you can go.
Oh, yes, thank you. Just a quick question with regards to assimilation. And at some point in time in your career, there is a point of assimilation that you have to, when you come into a different environment, communities, you have to assimilate to at least minutely the culture. So how do you strike the balance between being authentically yourself and assimilation so that you don't ultimately lose yourself, especially when you're young in your career and trying to find your footing?
Well, if you've been on the whole time, I said earlier, and just to repeat it, is you have these interlocking circles. Work is just one part of your life. Family is another key part. Hopefully there's good support there. Hopefully you have friends, and hopefully you have some sort of community, whether it's church or other things in the community. And you don't look to your job to provide you everything in your life. And so your job is a career, maybe something you passionately care about, whether you're a lawyer, an architect, or a banker. And I think if you are there working hard and doing well, and you have these other pieces of your life that support you, there's no reason to lose your soul. And as long as you recognize that it's a game, it is a game to say, Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and we are mere actors upon it. I mean, and some of that is true. And that's not being a phony if you're playing the game. And the game is being played, whether you want to play it or not. And I think there's nothing wrong with playing the game. Once you say to yourself, I'm not going to play the game, or someone will say, well, I'm not going to kiss that person behind. You've already lost once you said that. It reminds me of a very wealthy investor of mine who lives in a 400-acre ranch in California as a private jet at the airport 20 years ago. So I said to him, well, Tom, real name. I said, well, at least you don't have to kiss someone's ass. He said, what are you talking about? He said, every morning I wake up, I look for someone's behind to kiss. He said, I want my clients to love me. I want those who are doing business to love me. I want them to do more business every day. I'm doing that. And I think that phrase is the wrong phrase, is you want people to like you. Mm. And it's not about kissing behind. You want them to like you. And I think words are very powerful. So assimilating, learning to play the game, learning to fit in, doesn't mean you lose who you are. Because again, work is just one part of who you are. It's not all of who you are.
Mm-hmm. D.L., do you have anything to offer, add?
I mean, I think that's a very genuine question. I mean, the reality is when I first started at the firm, I wasn't coming in with this huge, what I call black militancy beard that I shaved, earlier on this spring. But, the kind of personal stylistic points that you might start to want to have or show, I think you first and foremost got to prove that you can do your job. And then as people have more confidence in you, I think these other kinds of anecdotes you're able to leave in, your personal style, the artwork that you have in your office. But I think it's also, to Andre's point, recognizing that you're still building your resume internally, in your corporation, just as you were outside. So know that, like, when people come into the office and they're going to look at the photos that you put up. What narrative do you want them to see? They're going to look at the artwork that you have. What narrative about yourself are you saying? And you can, if you're in Chicago and Hebrew Brantley, he's a big, I'm a big Hebrew fan. I probably wasn't putting up Hebrew paintings, my first year in the law firm. It was probably more my credentials. So you see that I actually graduated and have a right to be here. But it's learning and building up that tenure gives you a lot more, if you will, political capital internally to be able to expand towards the things that you care about and to be your more authentic self, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Joyce, let me add also, and this is something that I think African Americans are loath to do. There's nothing wrong with having a therapist. Someone you can go see and say, look, I'm uncomfortable here, and talk that through with somebody. Get at why you're uncomfortable, because it may be more in your head than it is in reality. And I think, Black people, we're notorious for not going to therapists. Some of the best money I ever spent was at a therapist. My best friend always said, don't come go see the therapist. Come pay me. I'll talk to you. But I think having a therapist can be very, very useful.
And I completely agree. Completely agree. So there's another question that came up. Sims, you have the floor, so you can just unmute yourself if your question is still, if you still have that question.
Yes, hello. I'm sorry, my camera's not working. Quick question, microaggressions. Corporate world now for about 20 years, moved 2 or 3 times for the company, and have dealt with microaggressions throughout my career. How do you tactfully address those in a way that really moves the conversation forward while not offending everyone, even though you got something you need to say?
Thank you for that. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll start. You know, it's funny that, and I assume by the term microaggression is something someone says that isn't intentionally racist, but might be perceived that way. And again, perception is the key thing. I think you have to pick and choose your battles. You can't fight on every perceived offense. And earlier when D.L. said, you know, I'm going to assume the audience is Black, so I'm going to, you know, say one thing, I teased him a little bit, is I pride myself on saying exactly what I would say, regardless of the audience. And I don't sugarcoat it. And what's interesting is, you know, to some people, when I talk, you know, some of the younger African Americans, they are here, Dr. King, and, you know, oh, that's too nice. And then I'll say the same thing in a boardroom, and they're here, Malcolm X. It's the same thing. And part of the art is learning how to articulate a particular situation. So when it comes to microaggressions, I think you can point out to someone in a very magnanimous way that what they said could be perceived differently. But again, you have to pick and choose. If it's your boss, if it happens once, maybe let it go. There's no reason to have a fight every day. If he does it, or he or she does it again, you can say to them, you know, Joe, you know, you've said this twice now. The first time I ignored it, but do you have any idea that this might be perceived as being X? And sometimes they don't know. They might thank you for that. But if you walk on eggshells, you're not going to be happy, nor are you going to be effective. And, you know, the same friend on the call, his favorite line is the ability to tell someone to go to hell and have them be happy on the way there is what he calls tact. And so being able to tactfully tell someone that what they said, and it should not be done from a place of anger, because when you're angry, you can't communicate clearly. And when other people perceive you as being angry, then I think their listening shut down. It doesn't mean you have to be passive, but be clear.
Mm-hmm. D.L., anything you want to offer in addition?
Microaggressions inherently are statements that people say without thinking about the listener's reception of that statement. And so whatever way you can have a conversation that constructively, not just critically, but constructively explains how you're receiving that statement and how you might receive it as offensive. For folks that are genuine and interested in actually doing the interpersonal work to get better and improve in how we talk to folks, especially in a cross-cultural context, they're going to receive that well. I mean, people that are not going to receive that, you know, you can only do what you can do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you for that. Kenneth, we're going to go back to you with your question. You have the floor. Just unmute your phone.
Good evening. Thank you, Joyce, for hosting this, and thank you all for taking the time with Andre and D.L. We talked a little bit earlier about the idea of saving face to secure the future versus to secure the future. And one of the things that I think continues to sort of surface is, you know, as you guys were talking, what occurred to me was the line from the great debaters, do what you have to do so you can do what you want to do. And I know that you guys talked about the idea of relationship building and some of the things you have to do that are critical for you to be successful long term. One of the things I maybe want to hear you guys talk a little bit about is maybe those times when it was challenging, when you had to maybe sort of wait things out until you were able to have this sort of larger influence. How did you navigate those times? Maybe talk about that experience and what words of wisdom you would offer as you, again, tried to navigate those times when you couldn't necessarily do exactly what you wanted to do or influence in the way you wanted to, because you just didn't have the role in the organization or the seat at the table or were newer to the role?
Who wants to start?
D.L. go first.
I love how Andre delegates.
all the super tough ones. He gives me the opportunity to step forward. You know, I'm trying to think off the top of my head about a tough conversation. I recall when I was an associate, I went into a courtroom in Collier County of Chicago. There was nobody else that looked like me in the room. And the court called everybody. I was the first one in the courtroom, and he called folks in order, but called me last. And I remember going back to the partner at the time, you know, and I gave him the status update. We finished what we needed to do. We got the order entered that we needed to, but I just said, you know, I just wanted to add something that stuck out to me. And I just told him the story. You know, the judge called me last when he was calling everybody else in order. And, you know, it's finding those little steps where you can take. It might not be the big step to just have this big dialogue, you know, with the partner at that time to say, I think he was being whatever, but you're also kind of seeding, and I guess, you know, being courageous in respect of naming what you're feeling and what you're thinking. And, you know, lo and behold, that partner is now the chairman of our firm, and I'm the diversity and inclusion partner in addition to the commercial litigation partner. And so, you know, even back then, you know, was I in a position to have these broader conversations about race, et cetera, et cetera? No, but I think the journey that you start to bring people along with you little by little, to those that again are receptive to that, you're able to make some significant strides.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great example. Thank you. Congratulations.
Great story. Great question. Thank you.
Anything you want to offer, Andre?
No, I think D.L. covered it.
Okay, super. So if anyone has any final questions, you can certainly pose them now because we have only a couple minutes left. One thing that I wanted to, as a final kind of a wrap up question, reflective moment for both you, D.L., as well as Andre, you know, I believe that every situation and moment in time has purpose. So whether or not it was a challenging time, challenging situation, it's important that we definitely don't operate out of a place of regret. But sometimes, you know, in hindsight, if you would have had more information, a broader network, a different set of circumstances, the outcome may have been different. So I want you all to fill in the blank with that in mind. So when I think about my career, the highs, the lows, the in-between, I wish I would have known blank. So I'll start with you, Andre. What would you have wished you had known in terms of things that perhaps you would have managed differently, taken a different path? What does that look like for you?
Well, I would have known that it was okay to go and invite a senior person out to lunch early. So, you know, I got a quick start when I left graduate school. I went to Goldman's there for 5 years, and Goldman was a different sort of place. It was a partnership as opposed to a corporation. So every day you worked with the owners as opposed to the CEO. Every guy who ran a group was a partner, owned part of the firm. So when I got to Kraft, this big, at the time, $10 billion subsidiary of Darden Kraft, I had already been schooled. So the first week I was there, I went up to the CEO's office and told the secretary, I said, you know, Mr. Miles, the guy named was Mike Miles, who since passed away. I said, I just joined this group, in the M&A group. I'd like to have lunch with him. And what was interesting, I thought at that point, I figured that was normal. And I would have done that more often when I joined Goldman. So I told my young, my age white colleague, she said, can we have lunch there? So I'm having lunch with Mike Miles. And she said, you and who? I said, just me and Mike. She says, how'd you do that? I said, I just went up to his desk and asked the secretary. She put me on the calendar. So here was this young white girl. She was MBA from Michigan. And she was saying, wow, it never would have occurred to me to do that. So I would have done that more. I didn't realize when I joined Goldman that there were a lot of my colleagues who were having weekend dinners with partners, going to partners' homes. And I went back to the Bronx where I lived with my aunt and went to work every day. So I did not realize the power of relationships there. The other thing that I was very good at, especially for the younger people on the phone, when I interviewed a place, I had a bunch of interviews for only several jobs. I would ask the interviewer, tell me about being Black in your company. Tell me that, you know, will that be a hindrance here? Or so that put them on the spot. So now they have to defend, no, we're open and you can do well and the whole bit. And I said to one guy, if I join, I'm going to search you out if I ever have a problem. He said, I'll be waiting on you. I didn't go to that particular company. I went someplace else. And to another question about assimilation, if you find a situation unbearable, first go see a therapist to figure out why. Is it you or is it them? But once you realize it's them, you can leave. You don't have to stay. Yeah. And there's some companies where the culture is so bad, racial and beyond that, where you say, you know what, this is not the kind of place I want to be. So again, the long answer to your question, but again, I would have said hello more often to more people and had those cup of coffee. I'm not a bourbon drinker. I did, a little wine maybe. But.
Okay. Coffee works, tea works.
Tea.
What about you, D.L.? If you were to think about the highs, the lows, the in between, what would you have done differently, or what would you wish you'd known now?
I was thinking about this question in your in the pregame, if you will, and I think take time to enjoy a little bit of every season, because I think we get into this routine where we're just doing the grind, we're just trying to be excellent at our job, we're trying to, for me personally, it was build a family at the same time I was starting at the firm and building a career and building your network and going to ABC different events and meeting this and this person. And I need to meet Andre, he'd be high on my list of the folks that I need to connect with, but I think that rat race can be exhausting mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so it's just incredibly important while you're taking care of self-care throughout the journey. And that's the real, the workout schedule, the yoga, that I was talking to Joyce about before, doing the personal self-care, but also taking a moment to pause and reflect that, we have arrived and we are arriving, and to be proud of the accomplishments that you make at every level. Because I think when we're always in that rat race to get the next accolade, to get the next opportunity, to get the next door open, we forget to say to be grateful and be thankful for what we've accomplished thus far, and to utilize what we've accomplished thus far to certainly benefit the folks behind us as well. So I think that would be probably my little point, is to just find whatever moment that is to just constantly be in a state of thankfulness for the success that we've achieved thus far.
Excellent. That's a great way to close the conversation. So a couple key takeaways that I'll just do a quick recap on in terms of a couple themes that came up repeatedly was the power of relationships. So in terms of find them, cultivate them, nurture them, foster them, because that is one of the things in terms of thriving in your careers. You're going to need other people to help you do that. I love what you just said, D.L., about enjoying every season. Because again, there's some good and there's some joy that can come out of even challenging times or challenging situations. So you definitely don't want to let that pass. Mental well-being and self-care, you both talked about things that you support and do, whether it's yoga, whether it's therapy, huge proponent of both. So definitely the self-care, the mental well-being piece is huge. And then to end on a lighter note, I love what Andre said about when you tell someone to go to hell, you want them to enjoy the ride. So in terms of even sometimes the messages are tough, but it's all about the tactfulness and the delivery in which you offer the feedback. So again, big thanks to the both of you for sharing your insights, your perspective, gifting us with your time, and to all of you who were active participants. So certainly stay tuned for additional learnings and virtual events that I'll be hosting. But again, thanks to each of you all, and you all have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, Joyce. Andre, always a pleasure.
DL, we have to see each other outside of Zoom.